Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, November 5th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast on this election day in America. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines and stay up very, very, very late tonight into tomorrow morning. So you don't have to, but I imagine some of you will be up late with us tonight.
Moshe, I'm trying to be strategic about my coffee intake. Do I skip the morning coffee? Do I have the morning and then do I do like an evening coffee as well? I'm trying to figure out my best play here.
I've had election nights where I do the coffee all day, the midnight coffee, depending. Slept at my desk for half an hour between like 4:30 a.m. and 5 a.m. Some of those election nights, have done a few of these cycles here, and really remains to be seen. Will we know a victor tonight? That's totally possible. Many election nights we have known. In 2016, for instance, they were able to call it between 2 and 3 a.m. for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, right? And so most years we had that. And then you have sort of the oddballs out there. 2020, of course, would take a whole week, and 2000 would take a month to actually call. And so let's see how right the polling is. If the polling's all off by 1 point, which is totally normal, then we could have a winner tonight. They could all go one direction either way. So stick with us all night, folks, on the Instagram feed. We'll be providing you live coverage. Jill will be in the field tonight out in New York.
That's right, Moshe. I am going to be at the Republican headquarters in Nassau County, and I'm going to be covering the congressional races and the local races, which are extremely important. And I'll also be taking a bird's eye view of the entire country in terms of the congressional races. So we'll be chatting from the field as the results come in.
All right, everyone. I don't know if that's a smart idea for everyone to have so much coffee today, but it's a professional hazard for us. For the rest of you, especially those of you feeling anxious, go outside if you can, if the weather is good where you are. Go touch the grass, breathe deep.
Hug a tree, as they say.
Hug a tree, go do a yoga class. And, we'll have some certainty starting when polls close this evening.
All right. It is election day in America. Tens of millions are headed to the polls today. The candidates did their final rallies yesterday. They put out their final ads. And now we wait. The question, how long will we wait? We have a guide on the states where we think we will know the results tonight and where we might have to wait a little bit longer.
We're looking at you, Nevada and Pennsylvania.
And a look at the state of the House and Senate, some really key races and which party might control each chamber when all is said and done. Elon Musk has his day in court over the legality of his $1 million a day raffle for voters. A hurricane potentially hitting the United States in November, why meteorologists are closely watching a storm in the Caribbean right now. Meanwhile, wildfire dangers in the Northeast of all places after the driest October on record. And Russia is suspected of plotting to send explosive devices on U.S.-bound planes. Plus, we remember music legend Quincy Jones. And Moshe has On This Day in History.
It's an election-themed On This Day in History for you on this November 5th.
All right, with that, let's get to some news here. We have been covering this election for 2 years now, and it is finally here. More than 80 million Americans have already voted, and tens of millions more are set to vote today on Election Day. 2/3 of Americans say that they have voted, 44 million in person, 35 million by mail, and another 1/3 set to vote today. As soon as tomorrow morning, we might know who the 47th president of the United States will be and whether Donald Trump will make modern history by becoming president again, winning a second term after losing re-election 4 years ago, or whether the very late switch from President Biden to Vice President Harris was the right move for Democrats and she becomes our first woman president. The two candidates held their final rallies yesterday in key swing states. Trump in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. He ended the day in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the same city he ended his campaign in 2016 and 2020. He won the first time, he lost the last time, but he is pretty superstitious, so he's going back there again. Here is a bit of his closing message.
I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of criminals coming across our border, and we will stop it rapidly. I will strengthen our military. And as you know, we totally rebuilt our military, but now it needs a little strengthening after giving a big chunk of it to Afghanistan. Figure that out. Figure that one out. I will restore peace in the world, and I will rescue the American dream.
Kamala Harris spent the entire day in Pennsylvania with 5 stops, including a star-studded rally and concert in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Katy Perry, Lady Gaga, Ricky Martin, The Roots, and Oprah among the celebrities who spoke or performed at her final 2 rallies in the state's 2 biggest cities.
America is ready for a fresh start. And we are ready for a president who knows the true measure of a leader is not based on who you beat down, it is based on who you lift up. And instead of stewing over an enemy's list, I will spend every day working on my to-do list, full of priorities to improve your life, because ours is not a fight against something, it is a fight for something.
It came as the 2 campaigns also released their final ads, both uplifting, positive messages about how they'll improve America, inspire all of us after a campaign, Moshe, that has been mainly focused on ripping the other one apart.
Yes, where have these 2 candidates been?
And that was exactly the reaction from people on Instagram. You posted both of the ads on the Mo News Instagram platform, and that's what people said. They were like, where were these 2 candidates for the past few months?
Well, the way it goes is you start positive by introducing yourself, then you go negative on your opponent, and then in like the final couple days, you're like, we're going to go positive again. So people have a positive impression of us after I've destroyed the other one. It just has been, things have gotten so negative that, watching a 2-minute message about, kissing babies and riding and petting bunnies, is such a contrast from the message that we've gotten from these 2 the past couple months.
Okay, but back to the question. Everybody is asking, who is going to win this thing? We'll be watching all day for reports about who is turning out to vote. Women have outpaced men so far in early voting, giving the Harris camp hope, given her advantage with women. But at the same time, overall turnout is slightly down from 2020. There are also reports of increased GOP voter registration in key states and a lack of turnout among Black and young voters so far. Both campaigns will be working to get as many people to the polls as possible today in those 7 battleground states. We are talking Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Polls will begin closing at 7 p.m. Eastern time tonight.
Yeah, and that's when you'll start to get the calls of the various states. Jill, you mentioned the 7 battleground states, because we pretty much know how about 40, 41, 42 of the states are going to go tonight. We can call here on the Mo News podcast this morning that California's 54 electoral votes will go to Kamala Harris, that Alabama's 9 electoral votes will go to Donald Trump, and so on and so forth, because a number of these states not very competitive. Because we know this is not a popular election in America, but basically a race to 270. Which candidate will get to 270 electoral votes? Each state has a certain amount based on their population, the number of representatives they have, plus a couple more there. And so it comes down to 7 states. And when we start, where we're starting tonight, Kamala Harris starts at 226 electoral votes. Donald Trump starts at 219. Once we throw in all the states, we know how they're going to vote. Now, of course, there was that shock Iowa poll. So that if somehow she's competitive there, could make for a very good night for Kamala Harris. Nonetheless, generally speaking, past couple elections, the Democrat starts with 226, the Republican starts with 219. And so the focus is on what's called the blue wall: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. In very simple terms, Kamala Harris can win this election with exactly 270 electoral votes. She doesn't even need one over that, right? You need 270 to win. By winning Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, add those to the 226, and she gets what? 270. The thing about Donald Trump is he needs to win those other 4 battlegrounds: North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, plus a blue wall state. Or if he wins a certain blue wall state, namely Pennsylvania, he doesn't need to win all 4 of those other states. Nonetheless, it does come down to Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. She needs to win typically all 3. She can come up with a combination of 2. But if he just gets one of those states, ultimately, in all likelihood, Donald Trump wins re-election. He said at a rally yesterday, if we win Pennsylvania, we win the whole ball of wax, is what he told the crowd there. It's one of the reasons why he said Elon Musk, who's become a huge advocate of his, dumped millions, tens of millions of dollars into the state with his super PAC, etc. It all comes down to Pennsylvania. At least we think. Now, there could be some surprises tonight. There always are in elections. And so we will watch for potential surprises. But this blue wall, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, who wins those three, or at least two of them, in all likelihood, depending on how everything else goes, is our next president. Now, Democrats feel bullish right now because Trump has never gotten more than 47% of the vote nationally. We're speaking here. Both times he has a ceiling, they say, on his vote, and it appears he has a ceiling again. So they think he's not able to win over many new voters, and they just need to preserve enough of the Biden coalition from 2020 in order to get Harris reelected. You mentioned the women. He has to win more male votes than she wins female votes because women turn out to vote more than men. So because women vote more than men, about 10 million more women voted than men in 2020, he needs to keep outpacing her advantage with women there. And he, according to recent polls, looks like he's been doing it. He has a plus 18 advantage with men. She has a plus 16 advantage with women. Is that going to be enough? One of the questions we have tonight. Has he made inroads with Latino and black men? Will young men show up? How will the Jewish vote, the Arab vote, and the Muslim vote go in Pennsylvania and Michigan? A lot to look at. How will the Puerto Rican vote go in Pennsylvania, given the discussion there? Jill, there are several dozen trends, subgroups we'll be looking at tonight to give us a sense of where things may go. And then there's the bottom line question, which is, since she's sort of incumbent, she's incumbent light as the vice president. She's not a president running for re-election, but she was the vice president the past 4 years. The majority of Americans, nearly 3/4 of Americans, believe the country's on the wrong track. That typically means the incumbent party loses. Can she defy that history tonight as well?
I like that term, incumbent light.
Right, she's not running for re-election, but she's not really differentiated herself from Biden. So that's whatever. We're defining it here. We're coining it here. Incumbent light, Kamala Harris tonight. There's also age demos we're watching. The boomers, she's been leading with boomers, which is interesting, and leading with Gen Z, but not by as much. Older millennials and Gen Xers going with Donald Trump here. How will the age breakdown happen? We talked about the gender breakdown, talked about the race breakdown. And then the question you guys all have, which is, when are we going to know a winner if we don't know who the winner is? Well, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia count fast, and we'll have some results early for us. So if we see all going in one direction, that could tell us something. New Hampshire, not considered to be competitive, but if New Hampshire is close, that's a good night for Donald Trump. If she is blowing things out in New Hampshire by +5, +6, it could be a good night for Kamala Harris. So Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia are quick. And then you got the slow pokes. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, not going to happen tonight. Probably Wednesday, maybe Thursday, depending on how close. We could be stretching the week. And then the real slow pokes, Nevada and Arizona. They got a lot of mail ballots. They count slow. Jill just watched a press conference of officials in Maricopa County, which includes Mesa, Phoenix, and Scottsdale. They said it could take 10 to 14 days for them to have the final vote.
I don't know if I'm emotionally prepared to wait 2 weeks to figure out who the president is.
That's if it comes down to Arizona. If Arizona doesn't matter, then not a big deal. But if it comes down to Arizona, Maricopa County, they have live streaming now. They put in cameras now, so you can watch them count every single ballot if it comes down to Maricopa County. So, if you've nothing else to do for the next 2 weeks, you can watch them count ballots.
It's like the new Panda Cam.
Yes,
the vote count.
Much less cute.
All right, as we await who will be president, making the job much easier or harder will be who wins Congress. And that's because Congress controls the budget, and the president has limited ability to basically get anything done if they cannot pass bills through Congress, of course. Today, all 435 House seats are on the ballot. 34 Senate seats are also on the ballot, though control of the respective chambers hinges on about 24 competitive House races and a handful of toss-up Senate seats. So let's start with the House. It is such a toss-up that a single seat majority is not out of the realm of possibility, which is wild. And as we know, there's 435 members. So if somebody gets sick or has a wedding or can't make it, there you go. There's your majority.
Yeah.
Right now, Republicans have 220 seats. Democrats have 212 seats. And then there are 3 vacancies that we had mentioned. There are some Congress members that just kind of bailed early on the terms and just were like, we're out.
This place sucks. We're out.
We can't get anything done. The private sector is looking so much better. Peace. Of the 435 seats, we are watching about 40, and really only about 25 are competitive.
Yeah. Thank you, gerrymandering, which we can discuss on a separate podcast. For those unfamiliar, states draw their districts. In many cases, the party in control controls the redrawing of the maps every 10 years because of the census. And so they've drawn out many of your districts, not to be remotely competitive, but there are, again, about 10% of the House seats that are legitimately competitive here. Jill, that's something you're going to be watching closely tonight.
Yeah, the races could come down to New York's suburban swing districts, 5 of which have first-term Republicans from 2022 upsets. And then there are another 10 seats in California that we're watching, including 5 that are total toss-ups that could come down to a couple thousand or even hundreds of votes. New York and California notoriously can take weeks to count votes and declare winners. So it could be a while before we know who has control of the House.
Yeah. You know, you guys are like, oh, these swing states are so annoying. I was like, no, not just the swing states. Like, there's a lot of states where like things take forever. New York is so slow that, you know, that we were not even sure in 2020 if we could count all our ballots before they had to certify the vote, just because the systems and processes here are so slow. So a lot of lessons to be learned from some states that are much quicker counters, like the good folks in Georgia and in Florida, especially. They really learned their lesson back in 2000, and they count quick down there. But the House is key here, especially for Democrats, because if Kamala Harris is able to win, the Senate's not looking very good for her, and she will want at least one chamber of Congress, because having Republicans in the House and the Senate are going to make things very challenging for her. The reverse for Donald Trump, with the Senate looking good for him, if he can get a House majority, then ultimately he can start to push through a lot of his legislation if he has majorities in the House and the Senate. Now, I've been talking to folks who are closely watching this, who work in House politics, Jill. The move among suburban women here to Kamala Harris is helping Democrats in a bunch of districts, while Trump has picked up more urban working men. Those are in safe Democratic seats. So while it might help him statewide in a place like Pennsylvania to pick up Latino and Black men in Philly and Pittsburgh, that ain't helping House members who are running in certain districts, especially kind of heavily white suburban districts. So that is where potentially Democrats could ride, they call it the coattails of Kamala Harris, to a House majority there. Now, nonetheless, I'm talking to Democrats and Republicans. They both feel confident and nervous at the same time that they can win the House. And so, again, in all likelihood, unless there's some trend line out there that we're not seeing, I don't expect us to be able to call a House majority tonight.
What was the term that you used from Debbie Dingell? Nauseously optimistic?
Debbie Dingell, Democratic Congresswoman from Michigan, asked about the state of Michigan. She goes, we're nauseously optimistic.
Then there's the U.S. Senate, key to, among other things, the next president's judicial appointments. Currently, Democrats have a very slim 51-49 majority, but the GOP is in a pretty good position to flip control. Part of the reason is because West Virginia's Senate seat is all but certain to turn red. Democrat Joe Manchin is not running for re-election, so immediately, if West Virginia goes Republican, it is now 50-50.
And I should say, Jill, the Republican there, the governor who's running for the Senate with Baby Dog, he's the governor of West Virginia. He has a 40-point lead in the polls right now.
That's pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
But there is more bad news for Democrats. They have 5 other seats that are super close, and things are looking especially bad for Democratic Senator Jon Tester of Montana.
Yeah, there has been talk behind the scenes that Democrats are not feeling very good about it, which is why they've been trying to pump money and energy behind Colin Allred, the Democrat who's running against Ted Cruz in very red Texas, and hope that he can knock out Cruz. It's actually a very competitive race. So they're trying to figure out other avenues to preserve a majority there in the U.S. Senate. Democrats are on the defense this cycle. It just so happens that, a third of the Senate is up every 2 years because they have 6-year terms, and they just happen to have a lot of seats this year that are in red or purple states. So also on defense beyond the Montana seat. You have Sherrod Brown in Ohio. You have Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. You have Alyssa Slotkin in an open race in Michigan. And you have Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. A number of very close races there. So there is the potential here that Republicans could have a relatively safe majority, 52, 53, even 54 seats, if the night goes in their favor. Now, Democrats are feeling safe in Arizona. That's where Ruben Gallego is running against Carrie Lake, who's super MAGA, but she's underperforming Trump. Some folks in the state feel she's too extreme for them, disconnected with Republicans in the state, sort of John McCain Republicans in the state. And so while Democrats can preserve that, still not looking great for them. I mentioned the Texas Senate seat. That's something we'll closely watch tonight. Can Ted Cruz survive? He is not very popular there. Trump is doing much better in Texas than Ted Cruz is. And you do see this where people are deciding on an individual level, I might like this party for president, but I don't like this party for Senate. There is a Senate race in Florida. The Rick Scott looks pretty safe there, Republican. Nebraska could be very interesting. That's where an independent is running against the Republican there, Deb Fischer. And so he's expected to actually caucus with Democrats. So Nebraska could be an interesting race tonight. And I mean, frankly, there is a scenario where Democrats could keep their majority in the Senate with a surprise win by the independent in Nebraska. So ultimately, that's where we're at. Jill, just a couple of numbers we'll leave folks with here. $16 billion has been spent on this campaign through all the races. If we're able to split that amongst the American people, we each could have gotten $50 if they decided not to spend it on campaigning, political ads, annoying us with text messages. I would have taken the $50. And for all that $16 billion that has been spent, at least on the presidential level, it's been a couple billion of that. The race right now, I kid you not, no joke, as Joe Biden says. The Real Clear Politics average of all the polls, 48.5% for Donald Trump, 48.5% for Kamala Harris.
And Moshe, we're just a few hours away from being able to say all that's left to do is the counting.
Exactly. It's the whole sports analogy. Like, is your team showing up today? Are they putting points on the board? Are they scoring points and putting votes on the board? And who will get the most votes in the end? That's ultimately what's going to matter tonight. It's as simple as that.
All right, time for the speed read from ABC Philadelphia. A judge rules that billionaire Elon Musk can keep giving away $1 million a day through today. The decision came as a lawyer for Musk defended the legality of Musk's $1 million a day giveaway to voters, saying that the daily payments actually represented a salary to voters rather than illegal lottery payouts. Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner filed the lawsuit last week, arguing that the promotion run by Musk and his America PAC violates Pennsylvania's law banning illegal lotteries. Krasner had sought a court order shutting down the giveaway, which promised to hand out $1 million prize to one registered voter each day in exchange for that person signing a pledge to uphold the First and Second Amendments. The judge acknowledged that issuing a court order now may not have much effect for voters because the promotion is scheduled to end today regardless. And he did rule that it could continue.
Yeah, the big revelation, though, that was interesting, Jill, and is certainly upsetting some folks who thought they had a chance at winning $1 million. The Musk attorney is admitting, actually, we didn't do this at random. We chose very specific people who we thought would be good spokespeople for the Elon Musk agenda. And that was part of their argument, saying this is not an illegal lottery. This is a salary to specific people that we choose every day. Now, notably, Elon Musk did say in public that this was random. His lawyer in court said, yeah, I wouldn't have chosen those words. So could this open him up to a different lawsuit from somebody who was part of this, thinking they had a fair shot, and that it turns out that they now admit that no one had a fair shot? They were selecting very specific people to give $1 million check a day to. So we'll see what happens there. Nonetheless, Elon Musk has been dumping tens of millions of dollars into Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's 19 electoral votes, potentially key here to who's going to be president. And so he announced this giveaway in mid-October. He's been giving out $1 million a day, and people in Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin have all gotten that for signing the petition. Jill, I do think that having watched this cycle and the billionaires, how openly they're influencing things, this cycle certainly will open up a conversation again about money in our politics.
Moshe, we are going to be studying the past 6 months, the past year for decades.
Right. The history that our kids will be learning about this. You're like, you guys lived through what? What happened in that election? We're like, sit down, kiddo. I got some stuff to tell you.
And it follows the pandemic.
Right. They're like, how was the pandemic? What did you do during the pandemic? I was like, well, it began with viral videos of me being bored in the house. And then it got much more serious.
From Fox Weather, millions of people from the Caribbean to the United States Gulf Coast are keeping their eyes on tropical storm Rafael as the system becomes better organized and is forecast to become a hurricane within the next day or so. According to the National Hurricane Center, Tropical Storm Rafael will continue to move off to the north today and make a turn to the northwest later in the day. That motion is expected for the next few days. Rafael passed Jamaica on Monday night and is set to be near or over the Cayman Islands today.
Yeah, and then it goes past Cuba tomorrow and then into the Gulf of Mexico. The question is, what will it do afterwards? Does it still have the strength and the heat from the water to remain strong there and make landfall? If you look at current trajectories, it's headed towards Louisiana there, but there's lots of uncertainty about the long-range forecast, the intensity, and again, this late in the season, officially hurricane season is over by now. AccuWeather says there has never been a tropical storm or hurricane landfall in Texas, Louisiana, or Mississippi during November or December, so it would be quite a milestone if it makes it up there. In the meantime, folks should not let their guard down, and we'll keep you up to date here on the podcast as to how Rafael is moving. Staying with weather news here, Jill, just one note for those of us in the Northeast. We have some wildfire warnings in New Jersey and Connecticut. Not typical, but there's been that unseasonably balmy weather. Summer has lasted into October, early November here, and it has led to some of the driest conditions that we've seen in years. Records have been broken here. The last time the city of Philadelphia has had measurable rain was September 28th, when 0.1 inch fell. In New York City, the only measurable rain was 0.01 of an inch, 1/100th of an inch was recorded. So that made it the driest month on record in New York City, where records have been being kept here for a very long time. Now, no wildfire danger in New York, but again, we have seen several hundred wildfires now light up in Connecticut and New Jersey. Thankfully, no injuries yet, but beware, folks.
Moshe, in my house, we're actually very aware of this because we wrote in chalk a big happy birthday message for my daughter, and her birthday is in early October. So normally when we write on chalk on the driveway, in like 3 days or less, the rain washes it away.
Yeah.
It's still up. And every day I look at it and I'm like, it has not rained. And I'm now thinking, I'm like, it's been almost a month and there has not been enough rain to wash away the happy birthday message. And she loves it. Like we look at it and it makes us happy, but we're kind of like, what is happening here?
Well, it's gotten to the point where, again, we're not used to this in the Northeast where rain is pretty common, but there was a warning in the past day to conserve water in certain counties in New York because of just the lack of rainfall here. Drought warnings in New York City, which we never see.
From the Wall Street Journal, Western security officials say that they believe that 2 incendiary devices shipped via DHL were part of a covert Russian operation that ultimately aimed to start fires aboard cargo or passenger aircraft flying to the U.S. and Canada. It comes as Western intelligence officials say Russia has stepped up a sabotage campaign against Washington and its allies. The devices ignited at DHL logistics hubs in July, one in Germany and another in England. The explosion set off a multinational race to find the culprits. Now investigators and spy agencies in Europe have figured out how the devices, which were electric massagers implanted with a magnesium-based flammable substance, were made, and they concluded that they were part of a wider Russian plot. This is according to security officials and people familiar with the probe. Security officials say the electric massagers sent to the UK from Lithuania appear to have been a test run to figure out how to get such incendiary devices aboard planes bound for North America, as if we didn't have enough to worry about here, Moshe.
And the fact that, we so rarely, if ever, see state-sponsored terrorism like this. If this is the case, again, this is a report coming out of the Wall Street Journal via intelligence sources, but some prosecutors in Poland said that authorities there have arrested 4 people in connection with the fires, charged them with participating in sabotage or terrorist operations on behalf of a foreign intelligence agency. The leaders in Poland say that the group's goal was to test the transfer channel for parcels, which were ultimately to be sent to the US and Canada. If Russia was actually behind this, Russian spies were behind this, which Poland believes, it would represent a major escalation in Moscow's campaign against the West. European authorities allege that Russia is already behind an expansive campaign of sabotage, arson attacks in the UK and the Czech Republic, attacks on pipelines and data cables, and tampering with water supplies in Sweden and Finland. Earlier this year, the U.S. warned Germany that Russia actually had a plot to kill the head of a armaments giant, a weapons firm in Germany that supplies Ukraine. So Russia, as the war now goes close to a third year here in the war in Ukraine, appears to be looking at non-traditional ways to attack the West.
From the LA Times, Quincy Jones has died at the age of 91. Jones expanded the American songbook as a musician, composer, and producer, and shaped some of the biggest stars and most memorable songs in the second half of the 20th century. He is widely considered one of the most influential forces in modern American music. He died Sunday at home, surrounded by his children, siblings, and close family. He worked with jazz giants like Duke Ellington, rappers like Snoop Dogg and LL Cool J, singers like Michael Jackson, Frank Sinatra, and Tony Bennett, and rhythm and blues stars like Chaka Khan and Queen Latifah. So basically everyone. And rhythm and blues stars like Chaka Khan and Queen Latifah. So Moshe, basically everyone.
Basically everyone worked with Q, as they called him.
He oversaw the most famous all-star recording of We Are the World, the 1985 charity record for famine relief in Africa. Jones rose from running with gangs on the south side of Chicago to the very heights of show business, becoming one of the first Black executives to thrive in Hollywood. He won 28 Grammy Awards.
Yeah, he's up there as one of the all-time greats there in terms of the awards, the accolades, who he worked with. Incredible story, Jill. You know, you mentioned that he began on the south side of Chicago among gangs there, and he had a very difficult upbringing. His mother was institutionalized. His father left him when he was just 10 years old. And he says that music saved him. He learned that a neighbor in Chicago owned a piano, and he soon played it constantly himself. It says that music saved him from running with the gangs on the south side there. Among the many music legends that he worked with Michael Jackson, worked very closely with him on his Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad albums, near universal in their appeal. I mean, still some of the most famous music of all time. And he really helped transform Michael Jackson from a child star to the king of pop on tracks like Billie Jean, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. He was the one who really worked with Michael Jackson to work in disco and funk and rock and pop and R&B, basically all the various music that you hear and the beats that you hear in his music. In Thriller, which many of us, listen to, every Halloween, among other times, he was the one who recruited Eddie Van Halen for a guitar solo. He brought in Vincent Price, the guy that you hear at the beginning, the voiceover at the beginning of Thriller. And so was really creative there. And I love this quote from Quincy Jones. He said in an interview with the Library of Congress just a few years ago, if an album doesn't do well, everyone says it was the producer's fault. So if it does well, it should be your fault too. So he's like, you can blame us, but you also need to give us credit when we do particularly well. He says the tracks don't just all of a sudden appear. The producer has to have the skill, the experience, and the ability to guide the vision to completion. So, again, Sinatra, Jackson, Bennett, Ellington, Gillespie, Snoop Dogg, just an incredible career for Quincy Jones. All right, now time for On This Day in History, an election-themed On This Day in History. On this day in 1872, Susan B. Anthony defied the law and cast a vote in the presidential election that year. Now, mind you, it was 1872, 48 years before women received the right to vote. But she attempted to vote along with 14 other women. None of them were indicted, but she was indicted here as a famous suffragist. She was found guilty at trial. She tried to argue that the 14th Amendment gave her the right to vote as a citizen of the United States. The court said, no, women don't have the right to vote. And she was fined $100, but she never paid it. On this day in 1940, Franklin Roosevelt was elected for an unprecedented third term to office. Of course, he would also be elected to a fourth term in 1944, and then we would amend the Constitution to limit a president to 2 terms. And on this day in 1968, in one of the closest elections in U.S. history, at least for then, we've gotten much closer since then, Richard Nixon defeats Vice President Hubert Humphrey to become president. 1968, of course, has many parallels to today. There was a Kennedy in the race. A president decides not to run for another term. The vice president takes over. Of course, assassination attempts. In that case, in 68, you had multiple assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy. So, some are drawing parallels, though a very different time then. You had an unpopular foreign war. In that case, Americans actually fighting in that foreign war versus the foreign wars we're facing here. Nonetheless, a fascinating election, a time where Americans felt that the country was falling apart and decided to go with the law and order of Richard Nixon, at least what he was proposing he would do in 1968. And of course, that was the last time, Jill, fun fact, that we saw a third party candidate win multiple states. That was George Wallace, the segregationist, who won 5 states as an independent candidate and actually almost led to neither candidate having 270 electoral votes, which would have thrown the thing to the House. The point of me bringing that up is that was also the closest that we got to eliminating the Electoral College. After that, the House passed nearly unanimously legislation saying we should go to a popular vote in the country. Richard Nixon agreed. The Democrats agreed. The Senate was short 5 votes. The filibuster does its business again. And so we did not get rid of the Electoral College. At that time, the southern states were swing states, and they didn't want to give up that power. And so that was the closest, 1970, that we would get to eliminating the Electoral College, nearly eliminating it.
It's funny because I feel like on the Instagram account, there's a lot of talk about the Electoral College, especially on Mo News Premium. It's like it's like a daily topic.
Yeah.
Why do we have it? What is it? Are we ever going to get rid of it? And
because it's so
I feel
weird.
like it's never come up on the pod for whatever reason. I feel like this is the first time we've talked about it in the podcast.
It's so weird. It's a weird, unique system we have. We're the only country in the world that has this type of system. And so I think it leads to a lot of questions. People like to think about the scenario. If it didn't exist, how would it affect me? Would I be as influential? And for many of you who are living in the quote unquote battleground states this go around, of course, they evolve over time. It wasn't so long ago that New York, Texas, Illinois, California were all swing states. Those have shifted. So you would be less swingy, several of you. I'm looking at you, Nevada and Georgia, and the bigger states would have more relevance because turns out there are a lot of Democrats in Texas, a lot of Republicans in California, but given the nature of the system these days, we really don't talk about them. And finally, here we end with music, as we always do. This does not have an election theme. This place, it has no electoral votes. In fact, it doesn't exist. On this day, the Beach Boys hit #1 on the charts with Kokomo. They actually had not had a #1 hit since Good Vibrations in 1966. 22 years later, they hit #1 again with Kokomo. It was actually the longest gap for #1s for any artist. And while the song includes a lot of real places, Aruba, Jamaica, and they tell you about Bahamas and they Key Largo, like they keep going and going, the song itself about Kokomo doesn't exist. In fact, they have multiple stories. They say that it's a place that once existed, that we think we saw it, but then you talk to another member of the Beach Boys, and they say it was inspired by the beaches of Virginia. Someone says it was a bar in Florida. Either way, Kokomo, at least the Kokomo in the song doesn't exist, though there are several Kokomos across the country. Jill, I have driven through Kokomo, Indiana at one point.
You mean Kokomo is not an influential swing state that we need to be watching tonight as the results come in?
It all comes down to Kokomo County. It all comes down. The registrations are up, and we're really monitoring a couple of the precincts there in Kokomo.
Okay, everyone. We are going to end it there because we are in for a long day, a potentially very long night, a potentially long week. We shall see.
It could be a long month. Let's hope not. Let's hope not. Let's have a call tonight. That's my gut. I'm going to say it here. I think we'll have a call by 4 a.m.
Well, technically that's tomorrow.
Okay, fine.
Okay, thank you guys for listening to the Mo News Daily Podcast on this election day. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and make sure to review us in the App Store.
See you guys. Again, go walk outside. Go take a deep breath. Go call a friend. There's no point in refreshing social media all day and watching cable news all day. Tonight, it'll start to get interesting.
You heard it here first.